Hello! Today I'll be covering a few basic ways to cast on. I'll be posting these techniques as individual videos later on and linking those in the description along with any other videos or sources mentioned. There will also be a link to my website where you can find other techniques and resources as well as written and picture tutorials for these techniques. Before I get into the actual techniques, let me teach you how to make a slip knot. A slip knot is an important start to many casting on techniques and a really good knot to know. The short version of what a slip knot is a single knot tied around your yarn. So you can see here we have a single knot and then we have a loop of yarn that goes back through the knot and out here. Once you tighten that single knot, you get a loop that tightens as you pull on its legs, like that, and if you pull all the way, it disappears. There are several different methods for tying a slip knot. I'll show you just a few. The first is to start to tie a single knot, but instead of pulling the tail all the way through, you reinsert the tail like that, and that's how you get one slip knot. Second way, simplifying it a bit more, is to start tying a single knot, and instead of pulling this tail out and reinserting it, simply pull this loop out a bit and then tighten the knot. Third way, if those ways aren't quite doing it for you, is you make a loop, making sure to cross the legs over like that. Then you make another loop and insert it into the first loop like that, tighten, and there's your slip knot. The first technique I'll be covering today is called the crochet cast on. In order to do the crochet cast on, you need your yarn, a knitting needle, and a crochet hook of comparable size. I've also seen this referred to as a chain edge cast on. Begin by making a slip knot. Place the slip knot on your crochet hook. Doesn't particularly matter what orientation. Then hold your crochet hook alongside your knitting needle like this, with the knot from the slip knot in the front center. Take your working yarn, put the tail yarn out of the way. Take your working yarn, wrap it once around both the knitting needle and the crochet hook, so that you have one loop on the knitting needle and two loops on the crochet hook. This is the golden rule of crochet cast on and the standard cast off. When you have two loops on your crochet hook, pull the top loop through the bottom loop, like so. Now, when you're pulling the top loop through the bottom loop, you may struggle with it, so I would advise that you twist the crochet hook in towards the knitting needle a little bit, and this allows you to go through the widest part of the loop below. And I'm going to repeat this a few times slowly so that you can see what I'm doing. So, wrap, pull, top loop through bottom loop, wrap, top loop through bottom loop, wrap, top loop through bottom loop. Now, when you're counting the stitches you've cast on, count only the completed loops on your knitting needle, so in this case we have 6, and then add an extra stitch for the one loop that's on your crochet hook. So right now we have cast on 7 stitches. Wrap, top through bottom, wrap, top through bottom. Now you may find that your stitches start to get a little tight on the crochet hook. You want to make sure you're wrapping around the thickest part of the crochet hook. You can see that I've got my loops on the thick part right there. Alright, so once you've cast on enough stitches, simply move your yarn to the back, take your loop off your crochet hook and place it on your knitting needle, and you're ready to go for your next row, like so. The reason I like crochet cast on is that it's relatively easy to learn for beginners. Creates this very nice chained edge, which is why it's also called the chained edge cast on. And it is a mirror to the standard bind off, which I will cover in an upcoming video. Something to note about the crochet hook is that you want to have your crochet hook and your knitting needles be roughly the same size. You can size the crochet hook up to get a stretchier cast on or size it down to get a tighter one. And the way to do that is to check your millimeters on both your knitting needle and your crochet hook, and it should be printed somewhere on the needle and hook or on the packaging they came with. In this case, both the crochet hook and the knitting needle are 6.5 millimeters in diameter, and that's your easiest way to match. Knit and cable cast on. These two cast ons are so similar in technique that I'll just cover them both at once. To do both of them, all you need is your yarn and your 2 knitting needles. You'll begin by creating a slip knot, putting it on your left hand knitting needle and tightening. Then you pick up your right hand knitting needle, and just as if you were going to knit this slip knot, insert the needle into the knot, wrap your yarn, pull it through. At this point in a normal knit stitch, we would slide our old stitch off the left hand needle. Instead, we are going to slip our new stitch off the right hand needle onto the left hand needle. So we now have 2 loops on our left hand needle and no loops on our right hand needle. This is the point where knit and cable cast on diverge. I'm going to cover knit first and then go back and do cable. So to continue with the knit stitch, we insert into that stitch as if we were knitting. We wrap the yarn, we pull it through, and then we continue slipping the new stitches from our right needle to our left needle, just as before. And I'm going to do the next few slowly so that you can see what I am doing. So insert, wrap, pull through, slip to left needle. Insert, wrap, pull through, slip to left needle. Insert, wrap, pull through, slip to left needle. And just continue doing that until you have the number of stitches on your left needle that you want. And then you can simply begin your next row. No interruptions. So say your next row is a purl, you just start purling. So that's knit cast on. Now let's cover cable cast on. I'm going to rewind all the way back to that initial slip knot, and remember these both start the same way. So we're going to knit this first stitch and then slip the new stitch onto our left needle. Now, instead of inserting it as if you were going to knit this stitch, you're going to insert your right hand needle between the first and second stitches. So it looks like this from the back, it looks like this from the front. Still the same process though. You wrap the yarn and pull it through just like you were knitting, and then slide your new stitch onto your left hand needle. Now you're still going to reinsert this between your first and second stitches like before. Wrap, pull through, slip stitch. I'm going to do this a few more times. Insert, wrap, pull through, slip. Insert, wrap, pull through, slip. And just make sure you keep these loops that you're creating loose enough that you can insert your needle between them. Try not to make them too tight. Now you can see that this creates a really nice looking edge, and that you can simply begin your next row, no interruptions. An excellent use for knit and cable cast on is adding stitches in the middle of a row, such as when you're doing a buttonhole, and I'll demonstrate that technique for you now. So I've knit this piece that's 12 stitches across. I bound off the 6 stitches in the middle on the previous row, so now we have a 6 stitch wide hole that we need to fill. We're going to fill that with cable cast on. So first we're going to knit these first 3 stitches just as normal. So an important consideration when doing this technique is that cable cast on and knit cast on grow to the right from wherever you start them. So if I start them here, it will grow to the right, but you can see I had to bridge that gap between this stitch and my next stitches using this little bar right here, and that will make for a tight buttonhole with an awkward bar across it, so you don't want that. So instead what we're going to do is turn our work, so now we're looking at the wrong side, and we're going to grow our cable cast on from here, and that way it grows at the same time that you carry your working yarn with you. I'll show you what I mean. So you're going to insert between the first and second stitch on your left hand needle, and because we already have those stitches there, we don't need to do the setup like we did when we were initially casting on. So we're going to insert, wrap around, pull through, place the new stitch on our left hand needle, and we're going to continue doing that 5 more times, total of 6. So insert, wrap, pull through, slip, insert, wrap, pull through, slip, insert, wrap, pull through, slip, insert, wrap, pull through, slip. We should have a total of 9 stitches on our left needle and 3 on our right needle, bringing us back to the original 12. You can see that we have no awkward bar between these two. And so now all we need to do is turn our work, make sure our yarn's in the back for the next knit stitch, and we're ready to rumble. So we just knit the next 3 stitches as normal. And there you have it, cable cast on in the middle of a row. Backwards loop cast on. The backwards loop cast on is the simplest in terms of steps, but there is a trick to using it correctly, and I'll show you that now. All you need to do the backwards loop cast on is your yarn and a needle. Start with a slip knot. Place that on your left needle, and then simply make a loop with the yarn, making sure you cross the legs, and then place that loop on the knitting needle, ensuring that you have the legs crossed still, because if you don't, if you do the same loop and place it on the knitting needle the other way, the loop simply pulls apart. So the simplest way to do this is to make a loop where the left leg crosses in front and the right leg crosses behind, and then slip it onto your needle like that. I'm just going to do these next few slowly so that you see what I'm doing. And when you've reached enough stitches, you can simply start knitting or purling the next row with no extra setup. So I'm just going to knit this next row to show you. As you knit your first row, you will notice this bar between your left hand needle and your right hand needle, this one right here, starts to get longer and longer as your backwards loops tighten a little bit. And you want to make sure they're snug but not too snug. You don't want to strangle your yarn, but you also don't want it to be loose and loopy. And as you knit this row, that bar between your needles will get longer and longer. And once you reach the slip knot, if you knit the slip knot, that loop will now become part of your knitting, like that. So instead of knitting your slip knot, cast on 1 additional stitch so that you have however many stitches the pattern called for plus 1. And when you reach the slip knot, instead of knitting it, just slide it off your left hand needle and pull it up. And there you have a nice neat cast on with no weird extra loops. Long tail cast on. This is a slightly more complicated cast on, but it does have its advantages. A long tail cast on creates a very solid cast on that's hard to unravel. It also knits the first row as you cast on. You may not want to use this for a lace pattern that begins the lace on the first row because it may mess up your tension. However, if you have a pattern that begins with a row of just knit or just purl, then you can use this cast on and count that as your first row and start on the second row. So to work the long tail cast on, you need one knitting needle and your yarn. Create a slip knot in the yarn, which I've done already. Put it on your knitting needle. Hold your knitting needle in your right hand with the two legs of yarn dangling down. Then insert your index finger and your thumb between the two strands of yarn. Using your last three fingers, grip the yarn so you now have this. Then bring the right hand needle down so that you have a loop of yarn on your thumb and a strand coming off your index finger right here. So you can see what that looks like. So what you're going to do is essentially knit the first row using your thumb as your left hand needle and using your index finger to tension the yarn. Let me show you how that works. You go up through the thumb loop just as if you were knitting. You grab that strand coming off your index finger, pull it down through the thumb loop, and then instead of sliding this loop off the left hand needle like you would normally, we're just going to use our thumb to let go. And then we reset by inserting our thumb between the two strands of yarn and pulling out. And while we are resetting, we're also snugging up that first cast on stitch. Bring the needle back down so we're back where we started, loop on thumb, strand coming off index finger. I'm going to go through this slowly a few times because this is complicated. So insert up through thumb loop, grab strand at index finger, pull strand through thumb loop, let go with thumb, reinsert thumb, pull that snug, and we're back where we started. Insert up through thumb loop, grab index strand, pull down through thumb loop, let go with thumb, then reinsert thumb and use it to snug that up. And I'm going to try this from a few different angles so you can really see what I'm doing. Insert up through thumb loop, grab index strand, down through thumb loop, let go with thumb, reinsert thumb, and pull that out. I'm just going to do a few more while I talk to you about a long tail versus a short tail cast on. Most cast-ons are short tail cast-ons, and what that means is that they only use the working yarn to cast on. And another thing, you may find your thumb loop starts to get very long. Just let go of everything and just reset. That's all you got to do. So most cast-ons are short tail cast-ons, and that means they only use the working yarn to cast on. A long tail cast-on uses both your working and your tail yarn to cast on. And that means it will consume them eventually. So if your tail is not long enough, you will not be able to finish the cast on. This is why I don't recommend a long tail cast on for anything over, say, 40-ish stitches. You can do that, and I will give you advice for how if you wish to. I just don't advise you do. So one of the things you can do to ensure you have a long enough tail is cast on a number of stitches, let's say 12. And I'm not counting the slip knot for this. So we're going to cast on 12 stitches. And we're going to figure out how much of a tail 12 stitches takes up, and then use that to figure out how many stitches we need to cast on if we're casting on, say, 120 stitches. So 10 times 12. We're just going to slide all these stitches off except our slip knot, unravel, and we see we need this long of a tail to do 12 stitches, so we will need 10 times this for 120 stitches. Obviously I wouldn't advise that because that would be something like 80 or 90 inches worth of yarn plus a little extra to make sure you don't run out and so that you have a tail to weave in at the ends. So that's one method. If you really want to insist on doing a long tail cast on and you don't want to do the math involved in that first method, here's what I'd suggest. do an invisible join between two balls of yarn. In this case, it's two different balls of yarn just to demonstrate the technique, but obviously you would use the yarn you're using for your project, so that you essentially have an infinite tail and infinite working yarn on both sides. And then you would start your long tail cast on with the slip knot at the join, and I'll show you what that looks like. So you put the slip knot on your right hand needle, and you've got your tail and your working yarn, and then you are doing your long tail cast on, and you can just keep going with this basically forever. And it looks a little chunky right now. That's because of the Russian join. I'll show you what it looks like once it smooths out a little. So you would keep casting on this way until you have enough stitches on your needle. And then to create the tail, you would simply give yourself enough room to weave that in and cut it. There you go. Long tail cast on as long as you like. Well, thank you all for joining me today. I hope you've learned something interesting. Subscribe for more videos in the future. Let me know down in the comments if there's a particular technique you'd like me to cover soon. And make sure to visit my website where I have lots of other information on these. I hope you have a great day.